By the end of this video, we're going to understand all about yellow, sunshine, knowledge, wealth, sickness, sedition, stigma. When Oscar Wilde was arrested in 1895, he was carrying a yellow book. And although he was later convicted of gross indecency, by the time he was, the public had already made up their mind. What sort of decent human being would be seen walking openly carrying a yellow book? We'll get back to Oscar Wilde in just a second, but first let's talk about paint. There are loads of different brands of yellow paint out there, but in this video I'm going to mainly focus on three: Citadel, Golden and Kimera. Yellow's a tricky colour, that's for sure. Its transparency and therefore poor coverage makes it really difficult to work with. On the flip side though, it's one of the most useful colours we've got in our toolbox. So luckily there's some steps we can take which will make our lives a lot easier, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video, sandwiched in with some cool little stories I found along the way. So for our first experiment we're going to paint a little bunny. I primed in black, and then over the top I put a top down zenithal highlight. Then I'm going to grab Kimera's warm yellow and just apply a simple base coat over the top of one of his tunics, just to see what happens. As we apply the first coat, it looks like it's going on okay, but you'll see as it dries, the transparency really starts to come into effect, and actually it becomes really difficult to cover this model, particularly when we get to this dark area on the back. You can already see those brush strokes coming through, and you can see we're going to run into problems right about here. Now you could try at this point just applying thick paint, but honestly all you end up doing is covering up over the details, and you end up with the same transparency problems anyway. So in reality what you've got to do is be patient and apply lots of thin coats. It might take 5, 6, 7, 8 coats to get a proper covering, and that sucks. So while that dries we're going to try something else. This is Citadel Contrast Paint now, Bad Moon Yellow, and again it looks like it's going on really well, but as it dries you get the same transparency problems over and over again. Okay, we've got to come up with a solution to this. Well, one thing we can do is take some titanium white, or any old white really, and add it to your yellow mix. Adding white to something increases its opacity. You do desaturate your yellow a little bit, but again I've got another little fix for that later on. And by increasing the opacity, you massively increase the coverage too. So applying basically over a black base coat here, and just watch this. By increasing the opacity of the paint, you can cover a black base coat in 1 or 2 coats, which is really helpful. While I was researching this video, I came across this cool little story, so indulge me here. This is the story of lead tin yellow. Lead tin yellow was widely used from the 14th to the 18th century. It was one of Rembrandt's favourite colours, for example. But after the end of the 18th century, it wasn't used at all. It just vanished. And no one knows why. In fact, weirder still, until 1941, no one even knew it existed. A researcher called Jacobi discovered the pigment, tried to recreate it, and he did so. And he was dumbfounded to discover a stable, bright, light-fast pigment that sped up the drying time of oil paints. How was its use and manufacture lost? We don't know. Why did people choose to use worse pigments instead of it? We don't know that either. It's just a complete mystery. Weird, eh? I really geek out talking about pigments, and hopefully you do too. If you do, then like the video down below, maybe drop me a comment to let me know. That helps other people find it on YouTube. And if you want to interact more, then you can find me on Discord. I have a free Discord server which is linked down below, and amongst other things we have an entire channel dedicated to nerdy topics just like this. Thanks so much guys. Just before I jump into a more serious type project, I thought I'd have another little experiment too. I often hear about other people using colours as bases for yellows, particularly pink is bandied around all the time, so I thought I'd give it a go. The outside of the cloak, which I'm painting warm yellow over at the moment, is painted in Kimera magenta. The centre robe is painted in purple, and his sleeve is painted in red. Just because, why not? I'm literally just applying that warm yellow in one thin coat, the same as I did do with my bunny, and seeing what difference it makes. And honestly, there's not that much of a difference. It makes the base colour slightly more interesting, but you still have that same basic problem with opacity too. It's the same when I paint with the other colours too. By avoiding the very deepest recesses, I do end up with a more interesting look to the paint, but I still have that underlying problem of opacity. I only know one way to solve that really, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next section. Okay, let's try something a little bit more interesting. These busts are by Ouroboros Miniatures. I think that's how you say it. Sorry Tim. They're really cool. I'm just picking out the very darkest shadows in that Kimera magenta, just to add a bit of contrast, but then I'm just going to get cracking with the yellow. Now I'm going to take my Kimera, warm yellow, and build it up into traditional layers, basically basing everything that isn't magenta in that warm yellow colour. With that done, we're going to make what I call a bridging tone, which is basically a tone halfway between the warm yellow and the next shade up. I'm going to take some golden benzamide snappy title, isn't it? And just mix it up to consistency. I'm using heavy body paint, so I have to use a little bit more water to get the consistency I want. But once I've got that done, then we can just apply that to the model as normal. Because that yellow is so transparent, we can still see our zenithal underneath, which helps us map out the areas that would be slightly brighter. And we're just going to colour those in our new lighter tone. I'm not too concerned about blending here, I just want to lay down the colours where I think they should be and I can sort out the blending slightly later on. While I'm finishing off this sketch, I thought I'd treat you to another one of my stories I found when I was researching yellow. If you were looking for a story about a yellow made from cowpice, well, you're in luck. See what I did there? Indian yellow arrived in Europe in the 1800s in mustard yellow balls that stank of ammonia, but no one could be quite sure where it came from. There were rumours it was made from urine. Why would you make paint out of urine? And so a quest was founded, and in 1883 its origin was traced to Mirzapur in Bengal, where a small group of cattle farmers tended a herd of malnourished cattle, fed exclusively on mango leaves, whereupon they produced lurid yellow urine, which was duly collected by the farmers, dried, and then the sediment packed into little yellow balls, where it was shipped off to Europe. But then again, the pigment vanished, and no trace of it's ever been seen again. In fact, the only reason we know it exists, other than records, is because a single sample of it still exists in the Kew Garden archives to this day. As I mentioned in my red video, the emotions around colours subconsciously affects how we use them and how we perceive them. So take that yellow book for example. It's just a yellow book, right? Well actually, in Paris in the 18th century they began wrapping cheap, trashy novels in yellow covers and selling them at train stations. And pretty quickly they became synonymous with passing on unscrupulous ideas. By the time we reached the Impressionists, the yellow book had become a symbol of rebellion. And by the time Oscar Wilde was arrested, he'd written himself in his book Dorian Gray about the corrupting power of the yellow book. So in a way, he sort of sentenced himself. Now here's the interesting bit. I'm going to do the same as we did on our little bunny, and increase the opacity by adding some titanium white. But as you can see, that's really desaturated that yellow, and that's absolutely not what I want to do here. But don't worry, I've got a plan. I'm going to work around the model applying those highlights, taking a bit of extra care here to pick out all the edges of the seams and anything else that would definitely capture the extra bits of light. Now here's the clever bit. I'm going to jump back in and do basically a warm yellow glaze over everything. But I'm going to use Citadel's Contrast Paints Imperial Fist and just apply that, covering everywhere I've just highlighted. And what that does is increase that saturation of the paint and gives me a gorgeous bright yellow colouring over everything I've just painted. It looked okay before, but now it really pops. So what have we learned? We've learned you either need a lot of patience to paint with yellow, or that you need to increase that opacity with white and then glaze over the top of it to restore the saturation. I thought I'd whiz over a couple of yellow projects I've done in the past, just to give you some inspiration. And while you're looking at those, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's supported me on Patreon. I've got 5 patrons now and I'm absolutely blown away. You can see them listed on the screen around now. If you think that's something you'd like to get involved in, you can find the link to all that sort of stuff below. If you don't want to take the plunge on a patron, that's fine. I've got a free Discord server too, where we chat about all sorts of nervy bits and pieces. Or you can just click on my affiliate links, which are linked down below. Anything you click on helps bring the channel a little bit of extra money, and I'm very, very grateful. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.